Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this video, I want to show you guys how we can take and restore snapshots to a Amazon S3 bucket within OpenSearch. In a previous video, we did this with Elasticsearch. It'll be pretty much similar steps. There are a few differences. Unfortunately, with the OpenSearch version, we don't get the friendlier web interface that Elasticsearch provides with their version. But however, we can still take advantage of these same API calls. So in this video, we will install the S3 plugin. We will upload our secret key and access key and configure OpenSearch to take snapshots and be able to restore from these snapshots from our S3 bucket. So stay tuned and we'll jump into it. And it's all right. So first things first, we need to have our S3 bucket. So within my AWS console here, I have my bucket here just called Please Subscribe. I created this bucket for a previous video. However, we can still take advantage of this same bucket. I don't have any objects or anything in here, so this will be a good bucket for us to use for our demo. If we get on OpenSearch's documentation, they do have documentation around the snapshot and restore feature, which I'll go ahead and link in the description of the video as well. And you see that they reference, if we scroll down a little bit, taking advantage of the S3 bucket, they have this S3 repository that we can just install as a plugin on our nodes, which is pretty straightforward. In this demo, I only have one node running OpenSearch, but if you do have to do this, if you have a multi-node cluster, you would have to run this install on every node within the cluster. So here they say take advantage of the OpenSearch plugin. However, I don't have that. Again, OpenSearch is just Elasticsearch version 7.10.2 under the hood. So if we cd into our user share Elasticsearch bin directory, which carries the binaries of Elasticsearch, we have our, instead of OpenSearch plugin like they advertise in this documentation here, we have our Elasticsearch plugin. So I'll do the same thing. I'll just replace the OpenSearch plugin with the Elasticsearch plugin. So I'll say that, and then I will say install, and we'll say repository -S3. So go ahead and say that, and I need to spell install right, that would help. So if we say that, specify that, we see that we are now reaching out to the Elasticsearch repo to install the S3 repository plugin that Elasticsearch provides for us to make it a lot easier to interact with our S3 buckets. So that looks good. And so now that the plugin is installed, we need to now add our AWS access and secret keys so that OpenSearch, and again Elasticsearch, are still kind of one and the same, can be able to connect and actually connect to our S3 bucket. So within my AWS console here, if I go to my security credentials, I will be able to create our access key and secret key that we can use for our S3 bucket. So please don't worry about trying to use these. By the time I post this video, these will be revoked and gone. So don't worry. Don't even bother wasting your time doing so. Okay. So let's call the, we can use their Keystore now binary to add our default access key and then add our default secret key, which will be these values that we have here. So I'll jump back onto the node. Did I copy that? Okay, yes I did. So I'll say we'll go ahead and call it as Elasticsearch Keystore. And we'll say add. So first we're going to add the access key. So if I just hit enter, it will say it already exists. Do you want to override? I'll say yes, because I did just do this. Overriding our access keys so that these new ones will work. So I'll go ahead and copy this value and paste it in there. And that looks good. And then we'll do the same for, instead of access key, we will say secret key. And and I'll say yes again to overwrite, and then I will post this new value here. And it won't output any text by default, so even though it looks blank here, I have just pasted that in and then hit enter. So that looks good, and now we need to restart Elasticsearch. So I'll go ahead and run a systemctl restart Elasticsearch, and that looks good. We'll just go ahead and get a status. Okay, running, so that all looks good. And now we can log into our console here, and like I said, OpenSearch, and maybe that's the plugins that they're talking about. Maybe I need to add these. Maybe I need to look in how to install these plugins, like the OpenSearch specific plugin, because I'm wondering if that would give me a actual web UI interface that I can use for the S3 configuration as well. But it's not needed. It is a little more user friendly to have that, but we can also take advantage of our dev tools here to just make the API call that essentially the web UI is doing under the hood. We'll just actually make the API call ourselves. So within their documentation, if we scroll down a little bit, here, if you're needing to actually create a new bucket and you don't have one, so if you're needing to create a bucket within AWS here, so if we have all that, blah, 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 we'll go to S3. So if you're needing to create a new bucket, for just to try this, they have these settings that, or this IAM policy that you can use as an example, so that your OpenSearch and Elasticsearch node will be able to access that. And if we scroll down here, you can see this is now how we can register the repository. You can also specify a base path within your S3 bucket. So here, like if I select within here, and then let's say we wanted to create a folder like demo, right? So maybe you could say prod, or for production data, or you could say dev for like development data. So you could kind of organize your S3 buckets as you please. So I could create like a demo folder here, and then as part of our base path, I would just say /demo. If you don't, it's not needed by default. It'll just use the bucket root, which would just be everything within. As soon as I clicked into our please subscribe bucket, our indices would be all populated here. So you'll see that here in a sec. So I'll go ahead and just not do a base path. I'll just throw it in the root path for this demo. And then here's some optional settings that you can set, which again, if you watch the previous video where we did it within Elasticsearch's basic license and their web UI, these were all settings that we could set. Here we're just using the API to set them because we don't have, again, the UI feature. But none of these are necessarily needed. The only one that is needed is the bucket. And that will be the value that we said here. So in our case, our bucket name is please subscribe. So you can go ahead and copy and paste this within your dev tools here within Elasticsearch. So here I have pasted it here, and so we're saying a put command. So we're making an API request to Elasticsearch, and because this DevTools console is this command that we're about to run will go to every node within the Elasticsearch and OpenSearch clusters. So you only have to run this once. However, you do have to install the S3 plugin on every node within the cluster. So be mindful of that. Make sure you do that. And here we're saying we're using the action of Snapshot. So we're going to be interacting with that. And then here we'll just name our repository. This can be anything you want. So I like to organize it just with the name of the buckets. So I'll just call it please subscribe. But it can ultimately be any name any string of characters that you want. But I like to name it after the bucket just so I know which one I'm interacting with if I have multiple buckets configured. And then we have our type set to S3, and then we have our settings block here. And this value here will need to match what we have within our S3 console. So this name has to be exactly the value that we specify within the bucket, because we're telling Elasticsearch, hey, this is the bucket name that you're going to upload to. So once that looks good, and you've added any extra settings, if you've wanted to do that, we will just hit this, click this, looks like a play button here to send the request. And then we should get an acknowledge back of true. And now we can actually take a snapshot. So similar to what we did in the previous video, now that we have our bucket configured, let's now go ahead and take a snapshot. So the easiest and quickest way to do would, and again, they document this within the OpenSearch documentation, this snapshot includes all indices and the cluster state. So if I were to go back into our index management here and select our indices, this snapshot that we're about to take will include all of them. So it'll include our Wazoo monitoring, our Wazoo statistics, some of our audit logs as well. So this will include everything, and that's the quickest and easiest way. However, you may only want to take snapshots of particular indexes or index patterns. And for that, we can specify certain settings here. You know, maybe there's data within our Elasticsearch cluster that we don't necessarily care about backing up to our S3 buckets, such as like cluster status, or, you know, like these Wazoo monitoring. Our security alerts are not being written to that index. So really, this is something that we don't need to take snapshots of. However, what I do like to take snapshots of would be our Wazoo alerts. So for example, we have today's index here, which are our Wazoo alerts that we're ingesting today are being written to this index. You know, and maybe my retention policy within our company, we need to hold on to this data for a year. And so what we can do is just go ahead and back up to our S3 bucket that we have here. I'm gonna go ahead and just use all of it. I'm just gonna go ahead and take a snapshot of all indices in the cluster state, and then I'll delete an index, and then we will do a GET request to then restore the snapshot after taking it. So I'll go ahead and copy this command here, and we'll go back into our DevTools, and I'll just give it some space. And then here again, we're using a put. We are calling the snapshot action, and then instead of my repository, this will now be the name of the snapshot that we called it. So it'll match whatever value you have here. It won't be the bucket name. So if you named this snapshot differently than what you named your bucket, that's the value that you will put here. And then you'll just include the one because we can take multiple snapshots. So this will be our first snapshot, and then when we want to restore, we can restore from the snapshot number that we specified here. So if we go ahead and run this command here, we should see, okay, good. So we see it accepted. So now if we start to go back into our bucket, we should see some data start to populate here. So if we refresh, we now see that our indices folder has just been created. And here exists now all of the indexes that are currently within our Elasticsearch node. It looks like we can also just run a get snapshot status, and this would get the status of all snapshots that are being taken. So if we go ahead and run that, okay, we see our snapshot has started. So it looks like it's still in a started state. So it hasn't completed yet. So I'll go ahead and give it a few minutes, wait for it to complete, and then we'll delete an index, and then make sure that we can also restore from our S3 bucket without any problems. I don't see a setting though where we could auto schedule our snapshots to be taken like we could within Elasticsearch's web UI. However, what you can do is just have a create a bash script that does this API call for us that would take our snapshot and auto increment this number by 1 every time, right? So you could always do that and then have that bash script tied to a cron job that runs like once a day. So if you want to back up like once a day, there are some hackarounds that would allow you to do that. I imagine it's got to be a call that we can make. I don't know. I'll do a little more digging and see. Oh, okay. So this actually looks like a feature we can't do yet. But it looks like there has been a feature request open up for this. Okay, yeah, so someone else is looking to do this too. Okay, so it looks like there's a feature request for this within the OpenSearch version that is not currently available. So I guess unfortunately we're still stuck doing it manually. I guess hopefully if a lot of you guys see this video and maybe we can thumbs up this feature request so that the OpenSearch team builds this into the tool, that would be something that I would like to see. So I'm actually going to go ahead and thumbs this up real quick, just so the OpenSearch team can see that, hey, a lot of users actually do want this feature, and maybe they'll help prioritize it for us to actually make this a reality. So. And all right, so it looks like that has completed because I did a get status and we don't see anything here. So if we also go back and refresh here, we should see all of our folders and everything. And all right, so all that looks good. All right, so now let's go ahead and I will delete today's index, and then I'll actually go ahead and stop the Wazoo manager because this would just go ahead and create a new index as soon as I delete this one with today's date. And I want to make sure and verify that the restore feature is working correctly. And I'll also stop file beats. And I'll go into indices and I'll go ahead and delete today's index. So I'll select that. Oh yeah, I need to make this API call as well. So copy, go into DevTools, and I will use our delete command to go ahead delete. Okay, we got acknowledge of true. If I go back now into our index management and indices, we should now no longer see that. There, and we don't. Okay, good. So now let's go ahead and restore that index using our restore feature. So that index will exist within our snapshot that we just took. However, so I've now deleted it locally. So now it doesn't exist on the local file system that is running Elasticsearch, which would be this server here. So let's go ahead and now restore the snapshot, or restore the index of that snapshot. So looks like, oh, okay, so we could specify particular indexes if we wanted to. I'll actually go ahead and copy all of these settings and post that here. So we're doing a post again to the snapshot action instead of my repository. This will again be our please subscribe. They're doing a value of 2. This will actually be 1 here because we're wanting to restore the first snapshot that we took, and then we're calling the restore feature, and it looks like here they're specifying indices where ours will just be wazoo dash alert. Actually, I'll just copy what we had here because this is the index that we want to restore. Again, if you're looking to do this at scale, you can always wildcard. So you could, if you wanted to restore all of your Wazoo alert indexes, you could just do Wazoo alerts dash star, and that'll restore all of the indexes that match that particular index name there, with the star being your wildcard. So I'll post that there, remove that, ignore unavailable true. I'll just say true, 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 true. Include alias, yeah, false, false, false. I'll take out these rename patterns. I don't need these. You can restore an index and then rename it to a different pattern if you want to. So I could say like wazoo dash backup dash alerts and rename the restored indexes to that. But I always like just to have them as the same index name. It just makes it easier, especially if you have created dashboards or saved searches that are looking for this specific Wazoo dash alerts index pattern. And ignore index setting. Index refresh interval. Yeah, that's fine. I'll just leave that as is. Okay, so let's go ahead and give that a shot. Did I spell that right? It doesn't look like it, does it? So let's try that again. Okay, so once I spell that right, I get the true. And all right, so we got our accepted back as true, so that looks good. So now, once we give it a few, if we go now back into our index management here and go into our indices, we should see our Wazoo alerts come through here. And sure enough, we do. So we deleted this index, right? But before deleting it, we took a snapshot of it, and then we used the restore API feature to now restore this particular date's index. And now I have all of these, all the alerts from today's index again. So I can go back into like Discover, for example. And if we filter on these alerts, we now see the alerts that reside within that particular index. So that all looks good. So it is a little more like not user friendly as the Elasticsearch basic license, because they give you the web interface that you can use, where here we're having to make API calls. However, it is pretty easy to do just because they give you the console tool to interact with the API pretty easily, and there is a lot of documentation. We're able to take and restore snapshots and from a S3 bucket the same as what we did with Elasticsearch. It is a little more manual again, but with the little more manual intervention, I've always seen that it kind of allows you to really kind of understand what's happening under the hood, rather than just clicking a few buttons and it all working for you, so that when things inevitably go wrong, you kind of know the sequence of steps of what actually is happening during the whole process. So while running things manually can be a little longer of a process and a little bit unfamiliar to people at first, it is a good way to really understand what's happening under the hood. So I think that wraps it up for today's video. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one.